Now, just a short while ago, President Obama addressed the crisis in Egypt. The president condemned the violence there, and he said that change in Egypt cannot wait.
There needs to be a transition process that begins now. That transition must initiate a process that respects the universal rights of the Egyptian people and that leads to free and fair elections.
Now, we've assembled a Taking Stock think tank to analyze the situation in Egypt, the United States' response, and perhaps look ahead to what may happen next. Michael Rubin is a resident scholar with the American Enterprise Institute. At the Institute, Michael Rubin chaired a conference series called Dissent and Reform in the Arab World. He is in Washington, D.C. Mehrzad Boroujerdi is a professor at Syracuse University. He is the founding director of the Middle East Studies program there. He is in Syracuse, New York. And we have Parag Khanna, senior research fellow with the New American Foundation. He served in the Foreign Policy Advisory Group to the Obama presidential campaign. He is here in our studio in New York. Parag, I want to begin by asking you about a piece that you wrote recently having to do with the old and the new in the Arab world. You say that there is an old way of looking at things, but there's a new way. Bloggers, people that are of a different generation than Hosni Mubarak. You say those are the people to focus on. Is that something that you feel that the president has adequately portrayed?
It's very true about the old Arabism versus the new Arabism. Hosni Mubarak, his regime, his allies obviously represent an older generation, an old way of governing the Arab world. All of the people on the streets, they don't have a new model as such, but it certainly is a new Arabism. And I think that that is built on finance, it's built on technology, social media. It's the generational quest for accountability, for jobs, all of those things that you see them demanding. And I think that we should be focusing very much on them. As everyone knows by now, the vast majority of the Arab world's population is under the age of 25 or 30. They're the ones who we need to be harnessing and also appealing to in order to build a better relationship with the Arab world moving forward. I don't think yet that the Obama administration has really grasped that and is really reaching out to them as much as it could. Obviously, there are a lot of conspiracy theories going around in the region about how the administration is still a bit too cozy with Mubarak, despite the comments that we just heard. This will play out on a day-to-day level, but the strategic shift has to be towards this next generation.
Mehrzad Boroujerdi, can you explain, in your experience, is there an old and new Arab world, or are the grievances that are being fought over as old as the Arab world itself?
Well, I certainly agree with the first guest about his assessment of these two generations. Of course, Mr. Mubarak and company do represent the old order of things. These are men in their late 70s and 80s. They came from that statist, background dating back to the time of Nasser. They oversaw this transition to a more neoliberal, economy inaugurated by President Sadat. But unfortunately, the track record that we see in Egypt, both economically and politically, is nothing to brag about for this generation.
All right, we're going to continue the conversation. Mehrzad Boroujerdi, explain a little bit more your thinking about how the United States is playing a role right now. And indeed, we just heard a bit from Charlie Rose's interview with the former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, saying that basically the United States can't discard the former allies as quickly as maybe some of us in the press would think.
Right, but I think Mr. Kissinger needs to be reminded about another one of these, strongmen in the region, the Shah of Iran, and what happened to him. We all remember the hostage crisis and so forth. So we should have that, element in mind. As far as what the United States should do, look, I think, we need to look at the facts. The United States happens to be the single largest trading partner for Egypt. It has given more than $64 billion in aid, much of it in military aid to Egypt since the Camp David Accord of 1979. President Obama has basically made it clear over the last few days that he wants Mr. Mubarak to leave office, and he wants that to be done right now. However, what raises the red flag for me is that, what we are seeing in the type of revelations to the New York Times about contemplating an interim government made up of, again, a number of other discredited military officers is not sending the right signal to the Egyptian people about our commitment to a true functioning democracy in that country.
Michael Rubin, come in on this topic. Can you give us some perspective? Has Hosni Mubarak been an ally of the United States, and would a new government necessarily be hostile to the interests of the United States in the region?
Well, I'd say that Mubarak has been a lot less of an ally to the United States than conventional wisdom would have. Egypt has actually voted with the United States at the United Nations under Hosni Mubarak with less frequency than Burma, Cuba, Somalia, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. Certainly, Hosni Mubarak has been supportive of us vis-a-vis Iran, but that has more to do with Egypt's own interest than anything that the Americans are doing. You know, our former ambassador to Egypt, Frank Ricciardoni, told a bunch of Egyptian college students back in 2006 that Hosni Mubarak was so popular that he could even get elected in the United States. And it's that sort of sycophancy which really needs to stop and hemorrhages credibility both in Egypt and more broadly in the Arab world.
Michael Rubin, how much is this a revolution about economics and being able to put food on the table, buy bread every day, as it is about political freedom? Or are they just intertwined and cannot be teased apart?
They're intertwined. I would really call this the accountability revolution. A couple years ago, I attended Hosni Mubarak's political party convention, and what was really telling to me there was that when even members of Hosni Mubarak's political party would get up and complain about housing shortages or inadequate government services, their microphones would get cut off. If that's how Hosni Mubarak treats the younger members of his political party, you can only imagine what people who don't have those political connections feel.
Parag Khanna, does this set the stage for further confrontation? Because there have been people who have been detained, not only journalists, but people who are anti-Mubarak demonstrators. If they are not released, if there is not a faster transition to a different government, does this mean that the demonstrators stay in Tahrir Liberation Square until they get what they want?
Well, the plot, Pimm, has certainly thickened, because not only do you have the standoff, really, that still continues in Tahrir Square, you still have various factions now within the protest movement and within the government that are deciding whether or not to negotiate with each other. On top of that, you have to layer the prisoners that you just mentioned, their fate, the timeline issue as to when, if, when, and how there's going to be this transition and when elections should happen. So this is a very sort of hot stew, really, that is brewing right now. I think that this confrontation is really going to continue for a while, because we can see that Mubarak is not willing to step aside immediately, and even if he is, the fact that it is at best, quote-unquote, Omar Suleiman who's going to take over is really, again, no consolation prize to the people out on the streets.
Mehrzad Boroujerdi, can you explain what this means for other countries in the region? We have seen uprisings in Yemen, a new government in Jordan. We've yet to really have any conclusion to what's happening in Tunisia. Are there other countries that you feel are next?
Well, first of all, let's keep in mind that, Egypt historically has been a sort of the cultural sponge for the Arab world. It has been the intellectual and political trendsetter. So what happens in Egypt is going to have much more, important repercussions than the events in Tunisia. So the Levant region is going to, in my view, be paying very, very close attention to the events unfolding in Egypt. Certainly, I mean, what we are seeing right now is in a way, a democratic tsunami, coming across the entire, Middle East region. I mean, the events in Yemen, what we are seeing, the concessions being given by the Algerian government, lifting a state of emergency after, 19 years, etc., are testimonials to the fact that the leadership, not to speak of Jordan's and the dismissing of the cabinet by the king. So everyone is worried in that region of the world right now.
I want to thank you very much, Mehrzad Boroujerdi, Michael Rubin joining us from the American Enterprise Institute, and Parag Khanna.